call this work session to order. We'll start with attendance. Mr. Welton.
John Weddleton.
Suzanne LaFrance is here, and Austin Quinn Davidson.
Felix Rivera. Forrest Dunbar. And then Chris.
Yes, Christopher Constant.
Chris Constant on the phone. And then if you guys don't mind introducing yourself.
I'm Aaron Yoganailan. I'm with AMATS.
I'm Vivian Underwood with AMATS.
Great. Okay, well, you guys have a presentation for us?
We do. We'd like to give you an option. We can. What we'd like to do is zip through this and give you a tour of what the entity looks like, the organization of it, and then we want to make sure that you feel comfortable that you have the information you need to be able to take action. You all have a public hearing on the 11th, and you'll be providing recommendations.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit? I mean, folks, sometimes it can be hard to hear all the way out there.
Yes. I'm sorry, it's a failing. All right. We would like the assembly to feel comfortable in having the information to be able to take action on the 11th, to make your recommendations on the plan. So we're not going to take the whole time with a long presentation, but we will just step through the plan to let you know what's in it.
Okay. So, are there any questions from assembly members before we get started? Okay, yeah, please.
And Mr.
Yes.
Chair, just Suzanne LaFrance here for the record.
Oh yeah, Austin. So that you were here.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the AMATS 2040 Metropolitan Plan, and it actually serves two purposes. There's a federal approval side, and there's a municipal side. And the federal side enables the municipality of Anchorage as the MPO to continue to be eligible to receive and expend federal highway trust fund dollars. And so one of the requirements is to have an MTP that is updated every 4 years. Even though it has a 20-year horizon, it has a shelf life of 4 years, the plan. So we're actually going to start preparing for the next one immediately after this one, actually right now, before it's even approved. So we're constantly updating this plan. And so we need to get the federal approval for the companion air quality conformity determination. And that is in some of these packets that we sent out if you're interested, but that wasn't part of your packet originally. That was what we put out for the public to comment on. So when we get the federal approval for the air quality conformity determination, that will start the clock over again for that 4-year timeline.
Sorry, one second. We've been joined, just know for the record, we've been joined with Ms. Zolotel. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're actually behind schedule right now. Our deadline for this version was last November, so we're now in a period of time where we have a grace period, and that's not a good place to be for us. So we're trying to do the federal approval as quickly as possible, hopefully by May or June. And so the work that the Assembly does is really important, and we need your comments by, I believe it's March 10th. You have a meeting in March,
Yeah.
and that would be the last possible time when you all could take action. And then if you're not able to take action at that point, then the policy committee will be able to move forward with the recommendations to finalize the plan. And then we'll bring it back through the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Assembly when that document is all finalized on the AMATS side. And you'll be adopting it as an element of the comprehensive plan. So it's actually pretty clean. Oh, yes, Ms. Willard.
Just to make clear, so at this point, we're simply, anything we do is just a comment as part of the public comment period. But adopting it as an element of comprehensive plan, that's later down the line.
It's later down the line, yes. Yeah, so this process is actually laid out in municipal code, and the code acknowledges that there's an AMATS plan, and then there's a municipal transportation plan, even though they're supposed to be as similar as possible. So I know it's confusing, and if you are still confused, that's perfectly all right. We'd be happy to go over it again. But I know that Mr. Lyon came recently, I think last week, to give you all an AMATS 101, and I think he did go over that with you all. But don't worry if you're still confused, because we'll be happy to go over it. So the plan is required to cover certain things, and it is supposed to have a 20-year horizon. So So this one is out to 2040. It's updated every 4 years, as I mentioned earlier. The planning area is for the Anchorage Bowl and Shukiakigo River. It actually goes out to the Knik River. And because we're using federal money, we have to comply with federal regulations, federal planning regulations, and EPA regulations. So it makes recommendations for roads, transit, non-motorized railroad, and freight, and it's developed with public involvement. Slide, please. So we've had a lot. It's taken us 3 years to get to this point, and we're now here at this. We're in the finish line. So we're. I just went over what we have to do. We have to get municipal approval, municipal recommendations on the plan, so we can get federal approval first, and then we'll bring it back through for approval on the municipal side after that. So chapter 1 is just the introduction, and it talks about AMATs, what AMATs is, what our planning area is, and the structure of AMATs with our subcommittees. And the policy committee, the AMATs policy committee, gave us direction in the very beginning for what they want to see. So it has to have an air quality conformity determination. We have to follow planning regulations, EPA conformity. It has to have a fiscal constraint analysis, which means that we're not planning to do any projects that are not within what we reasonably anticipate our revenues will be. And that is allowed to be on past trends. So that's how we've done this. So the regulations that say that we have to use the latest socioeconomic data available. Now here's what happens. Some of the data is older, but we have to use the model also, the travel demand model, which is a Transcad model, and the inputs to that model are population, housing, and employment. Well, the model was updated for use with this MTP updated between 2014 and 2016. So the latest at that point in time was 2013. So admittedly, that's older data, but it's just the way our process works. So we had to update the model first. Then we did the status of the system report to 2016, and we also used that to build on Chapter 4 in the plan. So we have heard from people that the data is older, and we're going to try to remedy that with the next MTP update. But the model had to be updated. It had to be retooled to make it easier for users to use and to make it more intuitive, I think. What happened. So the Knik crossing is not included in this plan at the direction of the policy committee. We're reviewing and confirming goals and objectives, and it has to have public participation.
Note for the record, Majority Mr. Peterson.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. So public involvement. So we started right off the bat with a public involvement plan for this project. And we hired our contractor, HDR Alaska, and we think they've done a really good job. They built a beautiful website. It's mtp2040.com. And you're welcome to go there, and you can see a lot of information about the project there. We started out with confirming our goals and objectives, which are based on local goals and objectives and preferences as defined in our comprehensive plans. We also have to look at national goals and national planning factors. Before our first public meeting, we actually did a description of existing conditions and did some baseline modeling and compared that with what the future would look like if we did nothing more than what we've already committed to in our plans, such as the Transportation Improvement Program and what the state and the city is looking forward to. And then we had a 3-day charrette in November of 2017. We invited, we had different focus groups as well as general public. We had two public meetings, including, I believe, 1 or 2. And we worked with emergency responders. We worked with special needs transportation groups. And we had a session that was particularly productive about integrating land use and transportation. So we're going to take some of the feedback we got from that and share it with the planning department. So then what we did, and in the beginning we were trying to also find out what the public wanted, what their needs and issues were. So we had a survey number 1, where we asked people to map actually some of their issue areas for especially non-motorized. And if you are interested in seeing those summaries, they're also on this project website. Then we took all this information that we got from the charrette. We asked our contractor to help us pull it all together and make some sense out of it. What were we going to do? One of the things we wanted to do was some scenario planning. So looking at different mixes of different things that we could do. I'm not sure how successful we were really in the end with this, but we were trying to draw a distinction between more or less doing what we've been doing in the past or trying some new things. So in the end, what we did was we came up with this, a blend of both of what we heard from the public. The reason why it wasn't that successful because both cases had a base case of projects that we assumed would be needed regardless of which option we chose. So that was probably more heavily weighted and didn't make a whole lot of difference. But we took that information and we had a preferred scenario then. We did the fiscal constraint analysis. We had a draft list of projects that the policy committee helped us develop through 4 different work sessions that were open to the public as well. And so we took the comments, we gave them to the policy committee, and so they did make some changes in the draft list. And so the plan that you see now before you is the public review draft. We had our final public meeting on the 5th, this Wednesday, at Mountain View Public Library. We had about 30 people there, and we got some comments.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a question from Mr. Rivera.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is a sort of a broader philosophical question, so maybe you can answer it at the end. But you made some interesting statements during this slide, particularly talking about things that we've already committed to in the TIP and things that are already in the pipeline. But we as a body have had discussions about really looking at that relationship again, particularly with the state, and looking at these 20-year plans and seeing what do we still really want to do considering our fiscal constraints and what doesn't make sense for us to do. And we're really in the middle of that kind of conversation. How, assuming we actually get results from that conversation, how does that translate to the MTP?
I think it's very frustrating. Really, the MTP is actually very frustrating because it is a long-range plan, and we update it every 4 years. So theoretically, we could start out with something new. Like we're starting the next MTP right now. This will be your opportunity to actually think about some of those things. Now, our goals and objectives, one thing we have to remember when we're using federal money is, we were going to talk about performance measures, but there are federal performance measures that we have to use, and they're in the plan. And fortunately, those performance measures dovetail nicely with the basic focus areas that are our goals and objectives. So it's not like the federal government is actually asking us to do anything that we are not already doing, but our priorities as far as how much money we put towards our goal areas, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is something that we can decide. And that may be a vehicle for you to decide which direction you want to go in. So there are some parameters that we have to stick with because it is federal money, and because we do have to meet their national goals and the national planning factors. And now we are the beneficiaries of 26 new performance measures. Fortunately, those do dovetail with our goal areas. So we just looked at this last night. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
through the chair, I also want to throw out, based on the seed of your question, don't forget this is for the AMATS planning area. There is a separate effort by the Alaska Department of Transportation right now for what their version of a long-range plan is. They call that the statewide transportation improvement STIP. So related to your question, I suggest we keep that in mind too. The comment period on that is open, I believe, through the end of March. Many of us feel like this might be the first time they've ever sort of publicly communicated that you can comment on it. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us to weigh in on that. So I would suggest that you familiarize yourself with that as well.
Thank you.
So this was our overall process, and I don't want to take the whole time talking myself, so I'll try and zip through the rest of this. So we did some public outreach. This person is familiar. And so we had survey number 1 was problem area locations. And then we had fact sheets and that we translated into 4 different languages. And this is just basically a quick at-a-glance summary of what we heard from the public and what we have done in response to that. So some of the things we've heard is provide more bicycle and pedestrian improvements, plan for new technology, maintain existing roads, integrate land use and transportation, and decrease congestion. Now this, admittedly, some of the things that we're doing are not revolutionary, but the plan does have more transit that the public transportation department is actually planning to do. We didn't put any projects in there that they are not planning to do because we didn't want to be in the situation of creating expectations or false hopes that we're actually going to do things that there isn't money for. So we have a new policy and an action item to plan for and set policy for electric vehicles and automated vehicles. And of the 51 road recommendations, about half of them do include improvements to non-motorized. So these are just some snapshots about how we've addressed some of the things we've heard from the public. So 3 is goals and objectives and performance measures. And I've covered this slide before. Okay, so these are our goals. By the way, these are not prioritized. So Mr. Rivera's comment about changing some of the mix, that could be a conversation in the future about where maybe we want to focus more on. Maybe we do want to prioritize our goals at some point. These all mesh very well, though, with the different focus areas in the federal government for our area.
Sorry, we're running out of time.
Oh, we are?
Yes.
Okay, so this plan talks about performance areas, goals, performance areas, performance measures, the federal performance measures, and targets that we would have to be setting. So because we have to set targets, that also has implications for where we place our investments. So chapter 4 basically describes the existing system, and I don't think we need to go through this very much right now. We just zip through that. Talks about projects completed since the last plan, and freight, level of service.
Actually, could you go back to that last slide for a second?
Yeah.
What's this again? That's what you probably know off the top of your head. What's this, John?
That was I think added a lane or something, but also did the scooter app.
That's Scooter Ave. Okay.
It's only the portion from the Seward Highway to the old Seward Highway, not the underneath
Right.
portion.
It's the
Yeah.
off-ramp.
Yeah.
On-ramp. Okay.
So you all can look at this at your leisure. I don't think I need to take time going over the existing system.
I'm sorry, did you want to go over this slide more? Okay.
So travel times by corridor, that's interesting. But so looking to the future, we started out by looking at deficiencies analysis, and these were the inputs we put into the model: households, employment, and population.
Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question on the population, we get this a lot in the public. Anytime there's a public plan and we're planning based on projected population growth.
Yes.
Where did we pluck our number from for this?
We used Department of Labor statistics, and so John Spring was the project manager at the time, and at the same time, the planning department, long range planning, was doing their land use plan update. So they took a different tact, and they used so the University of Alaska, as ISER, is no longer doing their wonderful projections that we've always used in the past, and those are more of an econometric model that take into consideration will the pipeline be built. What's going to happen if people move out of town? And they had high, medium, and low scenarios. So they hired a contractor, Bill Reed, what's his name, to do that similar kind of analysis for the land use plan. But they chose a higher scenario than probably we would have, because when you build roads, perhaps you don't want to overestimate. You don't want to overbuild. So we sort of took a more conservative approach, and our numbers actually mesh very well with one of the lower scenarios that the planning department did. So we're in line with what they did and how they did it. Just we took a different look at what expectations would be.
So 31% is a conservative number based on the different options you had?
Yes, it was at the time. Now keep in mind, I mean, I realize we're in a downward slope right now, but think what happened in the 80s, right? And so there is a cyclical fluctuation in population.
Can I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Does the population statistic take into account kind of the changing landscape of what makes up our population as well? In terms of, I don't know, like, so some of the aging of Anchorage, but also the different way in which, I'm just going to use broad terms here, guys, millennials live versus the way maybe other folks live, and their desires for things like public transit and other things. Like, we've got a shift in how we're living. And so is this just pure numbers of projections of the number of people who are going to be in Anchorage, or does it take into account some other parts of that? Is it more nuanced?
So up front, we don't actually take that into account up front, but we do look at, there is an appendix that talks about the impacts to environmental justice populations, minorities, and low-income people. That is an interesting question, but for transportation planning, I suppose the data is there to some certain extent. I'm not exactly, are you familiar with the model?
So what we're showing here is just the raw numbers. It doesn't take into account how people travel. It's just how many people are in the Anchorage, Chugach, Eagle River, and Matsu Borough area. So if you look at it, a lot of the increase that's happening is actually in the borough area. So that population is not just Anchorage and Eagle River population increase, because we do have to account for the borough's population, employment, and household changes, because we are so closely linked together, because that directly impacts the amount of people that are traveling on the Glen Highway in and out of the Anchorage area. So what you're talking about is how people are traveling is done later as part of our travel survey, and that's more on lines of what types of projects do we want to move forward with. But remember, the travel survey was back in 2016, I think. So before that, 2015, 2016. So it's maybe not using the newest information now, 2020, that we have available of how people are traveling or their desires, especially since we are still behind the lower 48 in how people get around.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess the last question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that here we have the borough with the big jumps on the population, and I would be really interested to know what our municipal changes versus the borough change. Because 31%, if that 31% takes into account the people traveling in from the borough, then I'd like to kind of know what the difference between those things are. And I can get that offline later, but I I would like to know that, because I think that's a consistent point of conversation when we talk about transportation in the municipality.
Thank you. Note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Kennedy. Please.
So this is future trends, and we've heard a lot from people. We want to talk about automated vehicles. We want to know about electric
Totally clear.
vehicles. We want to talk about flying cars. And so we do have a policy to track what's going on in the rest of the country, but right now the Department of Transportation has taken a real leadership role in putting together a body of agency people to actually sit down and talk about what are we willing to do to support different technologies out there for automated vehicles. And this is something that actually I personally had advocated for, and I was thrilled that the Department of Transportation actually took this on and initiated it themselves. So this is the deficiencies analysis. What would the roads look like if we did nothing more than what we've already committed to? And the red, the darker colors is, so the burgundy is level of service F, which is pretty much breakdown. And this was out to 2040. This is what would happen in 20 years if we did nothing.
Mr. Welton.
Well, I suppose that's a matter of interpretation, but F is not a breakdown. F just means you're a little slower than expected during rush hour. But in rush hour, you should expect to be a little bit slower. So F just, you can have a fine flowing road for all but maybe an hour a day.
It's almost standstill. F is the worst. A is free flow.
Well, just to clarify, you have a chart in here that shows at the peak times the delay makes our trips go from 13 minutes to 15 or 16. Hardly failing, really. It's so
Delay is a different statistic. Granted, we did use level of service for this. We're getting away from the level of service statistic though, because it's more of it's volume over capacity, and it just shows you. It leads you down that road of thinking we've got to build more road, we've got to put more lanes, right? So we're trying to get away from that. And actually, the Federal Highway Administration is also, they're not using level of service anymore in the performance measures. So we will be taking a different tactic for the next one. So, yeah. So this just shows our overall process. We came up with some different scenarios, as I mentioned. We also looked at a scenario for what would happen, what would it look like if we took 5% of the trips from single occupant vehicles and applied them to everything else. We didn't actually look at how they would be distributed, but we just took that away. And it was rather disappointing because it didn't make that much difference. So what we realized was we were going to have to make a humongous investment in transit to really make any difference, if we or non-motorized or other things. So, but that doesn't prevent us from wanting to go in that direction, wanting to make improvements. So we modeled the different scenarios, and then we came up with a blend of some of the ideas. And So in the scenario that we did come up with, so here's what we've heard from the public. There is support for the Seward to Glen Highway connection and for capacity improvements on the Glen Highway, the third lane southbound from Artillery to Highland, and the interchange improvements at Highland and Artillery. But some things that we're not doing is we are not adding a new lane on northern lines between Lake Otis and Burgaw. That project is gone. We are removing a travel lane on northern lights between Minnesota and Seward, to a vehicle lane to make room for more non-motorized improvements. That may not sound revolutionary, but it's revolutionary for us, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you say for non-motorized, would that also maybe be potentially like a bus lane?
We talked with Transit about a bus lane, and we're not in favor of that at this time.
Okay. I'll follow up on transit, thanks.
Right.
So when we say non-motorized, no, we don't mean transit buses. We would mean biking or walking. For the most part, along Northern Lights in that area, the best bet would probably be expanding the sidewalks because they're pretty narrow right now. And it's a pretty heavily walking area through there. And putting a bike lane on the speeds of Northern Lights may not be the best since we have nice parallel routes to the north or the south of it. So the thought was to probably expand the sidewalks. The issue you have along Northern Lights is there's significant right-of-way constraints, and any right-of-way improvements we do through there is going to take a lot of businesses and stuff. So there was concern about that as it was being looked at.
So I understand, you're saying that when you reduce a lane, it would be to then expand the sidewalk versus some alternative that's at grade on the street for non-motorized.
Yes, we actually did talk about, we asked Transit about a bus only lane. I just don't think they're ready. They're not ready to go there yet. I don't think the ridership is there, and also you have to think about the impacts that a bus only lane would have on the rest of the traffic. So other things that we're not doing is the UMed Road, the northern access to UMed, the Lake Otis extension from Airport Heights to Glen Highway. That's been in the books for a long time. We finally decided that's not going to happen. It's not going to go through Merrill Field. So it's not in the plan.
I'm sorry, so you're talking about some specific projects now. Where in the materials can we find this list?
Oh, sorry, that's in chapter 7. I'm sort of jumping ahead.
Oh, okay.
We're going to jump ahead to chapter 7.
Maybe we should. So here's the fiscal constraints analysis. This shows you what, this is like the bottom line picture. What our projected revenues versus costs. And so this means that we are under what we need to be, under our projected revenues. 1.1, is that billion?
Million.
No, okay. That's billion up there. And then in the long run, we'll be well within our budget also. But keep in mind, we're going to be redoing this plan like right now. I don't think we should get hung up on the fact that it's a 20-year plan because we redo it every 4 years. So it's our best guess of what's going to be needed in the future. Actually, I think it's kind of ridiculous if you want to know. We program for projects with the tip on a 4-year cycle. We can't program out beyond that on a cycle. The municipality can't really program out much beyond that. You can't commit future, as I understand, future assemblies to like a list of projects like this, right? Am I mistaken? 20 years out? No. So the only reason we do it is because it's a federal requirement. And just keep in mind how you all are going to use this plan for your purposes. For your purposes. And we're starting the next one right as we speak. Yes, Mr.
But you know, I mean, there is a value in saying we move forward 20 years. I mean, we may have an operational plan that's shorter, but I mean, it is beneficial to say 20 years. I mean, it's a wild guess what population would be, and things like that. But at some point, you need to have a plan. What could it look like further? What can't be done? It's not be affordable. So I mean, I find this all useful. I mean, beyond just to look year at a time.
It is useful. But one thing that we've been doing has been our practice all along was to just carry forward projects that weren't done to the future and without taking a fresh look. And we even did it for this one. We carried forward projects that were not done yet, completed in the 2035 NTP. So one thing that the federal government wants us to do is how do we use our performance measures, not just to see how we're doing with inching along towards our goals, but how do we use our performance measures to identify projects? Now that's different. That's very different. So that means that we have to look at our goals and objectives and the performance measures to help us figure out what our investment is going to look like. That's what performance-based planning is. It's making sure that your objectives are all helping you reach your goals. But we have targets. What are we going to do to reach our targets? How much do we want to invest in safety? How much do we want to invest in preserving the existing system, pavement preservation? How much do we want to invest in supporting the economy? Sometimes projects support a bunch of different goals. So it's not like a single project is going to perhaps do one thing. But I do think maybe we're on the cusp of looking at things in a new way. And not just carrying things forward that we've always carried forward in the past. And that might make room for us to make some more progress in the direction we've said we wanted to go, rather than just to come up with a list of projects without that in mind. And then we apply the performance measures and they say, oh, we made some progress here. Not much, but we made some progress here. And it's like a shotgun, you know. If we do a bunch of projects, maybe we'll make some progress with our goals and objectives. That is not what they will really want us to do. And that we need to have a methodology and discussions with how we take a fresh look at this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Constant, you're in the queue.
Thank you. The importance of the 20-year document is, I can't overstate it. The problem in my district, that I always harp upon, is that in the last plan, the 2035, there was actually some specific content related to how we're going to address the highway running through my residential neighborhood that's caused 40 years of despair and disintegration of a residential neighborhood. And in this plan, we actually step back from the commitments that were made. And so what that does is project that there's an additional 5 years or more before we get any relief from the harms created by the bad policies of whatever body was in place 40 years ago and 30 years ago. And so I'm really sad to see the projects that are barely listed with one line that don't say anything specific but leave uncertainty on the table for the next 20 years continuing as they are and even being less specific than the last 5 years. So I think it's important to have this 20-year view. Otherwise, my neighborhood would have no hope of seeing anything happen positive. Even with the process of getting the scope for the downtown PEL on the table, the state DOT came back and said, oh, you guys can't have any of that you want in the scope because the traffic levels will not support, even to the planning horizon, what you want. But those levels are supported right till you get to the creek at Chester Creek and south. Because why? You have to ask yourself. In the MTP, there's a really nice graphic that highlights the poverty-rich parts of our town. Those are the parts of our town that continue to see year after year, update after update, their projects move outward in time. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Graham, did you have something, Ms. Alto?
Yeah, I had a question. I want to make sure I'm understanding how these pieces go together. So the goals and objectives in the MTP 2040 that we will, you're getting public comment on and that will ultimately be approved, those kind of set the umbrella, and then the work should be done under the goals and objectives. So does that drive the tip? Should it drive the tip?
It should. In fact, we're updating the TIP criteria right now, and Ms. Redlining is leading an effort to do that. And the TIP criteria should definitely take into consideration the performance measures. Do these projects support the performance measures that we are supposed to do, at least with federal money?
Does it influence or control the STIP in any way if it falls in our area, or does the STIP not deal with anything in our area? I need to put that in
through the chair. There's overlapping jurisdictions. The statewide transportation improvement plan is, as the name implies, statewide.
So, if I may ask one more follow-up, Mr. Chair. Okay. So, do the STIP and the TIP ever have the same projects in them?
Yes. There's a couple of them. I'm sorry, through the chair. Yes, there's a couple of them. Aaron can illuminate all of the examples that he remembers of that happening. I think somebody mentioned the Midtown Congestion Relief Project. That's an example of one that was in the previous STIP and is still in the STIP and is being recognized through the MTP 2040 as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Welton?
So I want to make clear, so, I mean, if they have, the STIP has Anchorage projects in it, and my understanding is that they can't put something on the STIP if it's not on our MTP 2040.
Correct.
Right?
Within, through the chair, within the metropolitan planning area.
Right. Them.
Can I ask you a question on this graph? So it looks like there's this huge spike in state projects, right? And then it collapsed to basically nothing here. Yet the Department of Transportation continues to build things in Anchorage. Are they building it with almost entirely federal funds? Is that what's happening?
Through the chair. So it's kind of a mixture of both. So it's some carryover state money that's been GeoBond back in 2012. So like the Glen Highway third lane that's being built right now, that's a GeoBond funded project back from 2012. So it's some carryover from there, but the most of it is federal funding.
So, I mean, it's just interesting to me because we have these fights with DOT and we find ourselves sort of almost like begging them to do things. But the federal funds, aren't we just as entitled to decide where those go within Anchorage as the state is, the State Department of Transportation? I mean, don't we have a role in this AMATS process to say where these federal funds are going?
It's a sticky situation, but for the most part, it's supposed to be the MTP that helps determine where those federal funds are going. Because technically speaking, the federal regulations require that in order to receive any federal funding, it has to be in the MTP.
John?
Just to phrase something I don't think Aaron would be comfortable saying, but they can take their ball and go home.
The state can? Okay.
Because they're not required to spend their federal funds within our area except for a certain allocation, and that's what AMATS gets. So outside of that, it's up to the state's discretion on where they want to spend their funding, aside from some smaller pots of funding, but the majority of it is up to them.
Okay, and then why do you think there will be another huge spike in state funding in these out years? What is that based on?
Well, if you look at the previous historical years, you'll see big spikes up and down. It's based on GeoBond funding. So it's assumed that at some point, the state will have to start putting some state funding towards its transportation infrastructure if it doesn't want it to fall apart. And so we do our best guess to determine, it's only 2 hits of it, one in 2030 and one in 2040. So in the next 20 years, roughly, they'll only put 2 large investments towards transportation.
But what makes you even think they'll go up to this level again?
It was a best guess. We zeroed it out for 6 years, roughly, 5, 6 years, and then it would go back up. Now, that was our approach at that time, but future MTPs may have to look and be a little more conservative with kind of the fiscal realities that we're being faced with right now.
Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Mr. Constant, if I may. Your point is well taken, Mr. Constant, and I do think we need to identify long-term priorities and have them in plans for exactly the reasons you mentioned. It's just that priorities do change for other types of projects. So as long as we keep that in mind when we build these plans.
We have about 15 minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I totally agree with that, but what I have seen just in the last 3 years is we had the downtown PEL, before it was called a PEL, planned and in the budget, and then out of nowhere came the Midtown Congestion and Relief Project PEL that booted it out of the way and took priority. And so, you know, the outcomes tend to be the same. Doesn't even matter what the inputs are.
Mr. Chairman, I saw you taking photos. Just a heads up that we're going to provide a PDF copy of this when we're done.
I just find this the roads versus everything else I find humorous and illuminating.
Mr. Chair, I mean that's the reality. That's the reality. I'm sure. How did people arrive here at this meeting today? Most of us came by automobile, I'm sure. And yes, probably 95% of us do. That doesn't mean that we can't help shape the future. And
What does BBT and ARC stand for?
ARC's railroad. Alaska Railroad
No, the
Corporation.
BPT, that's bicycles and
Yeah.
trails.
Thank you.
You know, and I'm nervous about going through the rest of this. I want to make sure we get your questions answered if you have any. So do you want to just sit through it?
Yep.
Okay.
So this is the list of projects. This is how they fall out by mode, and short-term, long-term, and illustrative. Illustrative just means that they are not in the fiscally constrained portion of the plan right now, but they're in the plan for the same reasons that if certain projects fall out of the plan, then they're no longer on the horizon or even in the picture to be considered. So if for some reason we get a windfall, we do all these projects magically. Those are some other ideas of projects. And these are projects by our goal areas. And it doesn't add up because one project may support multiple goals.
This is the project recommendations. Did you want to go through it or just?
Right. Well, I wanted, is anybody here from Eagle River? Oh, thank you. So just want to let you know, because I don't want you to feel short shrift here. Most of the projects in Eagle River, to the Eagle River, are on the Glen Highway, let's face it. But there are 3 road projects. There's the Eagle River Road Rehab Project, mile 0 to 5.3. That's in the long term. And the Eagle River CBD study, phase 2, which is no, the Eagle River Road Rehab for 200 project. That's long term. Right. So 300 is illustrative. 300 are illustrative. So, and then we have Highland Road improvements, and there are 6 non-motorized projects in this.
Abby, can you hear okay back there?
Not really.
Okay.
Well, it's I apologize.
No worries.
So I've gone over here.
On the CBD, what exactly is the improvement?
That's the phase 2 of the CBD circulation study. We did phase 1.
The study itself.
The study
Okay,
itself.
got it.
So that's to actually come up with a preferred alternative that the community can actually buy into, not for the business boulevard extension only, but to look at the whole overall circulation data.
That was my understanding too, so I wanted to make sure that that was still what we were doing with the whole idea of kind of redoing the study. So,
all right. So I went through some other projects that we're not doing, some that we are doing, and so there's a study to do a Minnesota Drive Multi-Way Boulevard, PEL study. This is new. I'm not sure that there's enough right-of-way to do some cool new things in the area, but it's worth taking a look, and we wanted to support the community's desire for that. So it's a study, but it's a start. Another project is the Fireweed Lane Road Diet to reduce it to 3 lanes. And we have a project for Glen Highway HOV lanes, which is illustrative, but it's dependent on getting the Seward to Glen Highway done first. There's a TDM study, which is transportation demand.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
on that
so
one?
it's all.
So why are those dependent on each other? Why isn't that considered just independently under the current design?
Well, the thought was that it would just dump a whole lot of extra traffic into the Anchorage Bowl before we're ready to handle it with the Seward to Glen Highway connection. That was the thinking.
I don't understand that. So if we had high occupancy HOV lanes or high occupancy vehicle lanes on the current configuration of the Seward Highway, like why wouldn't we analyze how we could do that currently before we, and determine if that was a good thing or a bad thing, and then later, if it's a bad thing now, then maybe look at it again if there are changes made to the Seward Highway, because this seems like one of those things that could encourage more people per car.
That sounds very intuitive. All I can say is that that's what the feedback that we got from folks over at DOT.
DOT thought that having a high occupancy vehicle lane would increase the amount of traffic in Anchorage?
Well, it could. It could be. It could.
Oh.
Doesn't make any sense.
relative to the review of the MTP, and there will be multiple viewpoints that show up in the comments of it. Some of them we don't believe necessarily are accurate. Some are. But rather than beat DOT up too much, which I love doing, sometimes they have a different traffic engineering opinion than we do.
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, you have a comment?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there's only X number of people traveling into Anchorage, and just because we create a lane to make it more convenient to move in, I don't see how more people get created to use that lane. You know what I'm saying?
I understand your question. It's just, that was the thing.
It does seem to be a very like up is down, black is white kind of thing. I mean, the whole purpose of HOV lanes is to get more people per car, as Phil said. So you presumably have fewer cars. I don't know. It's interesting.
Okay, so we have the third and sixth couplet with the Fifth Avenue conversion to two-way. This project came from the Downtown Comprehensive Plan. There are Glen Highway frontage roads that help support emergency response.
I'm sorry, could you, the Fifth Avenue, Sixth Avenue, two-way, what's that?
Couplet with the Fifth Avenue conversion to two-way.
Is that aspirational or is that one of the planned projects?
One of the projects, it's 102, in the short term.
Great.
We are trying. So these are, at Minnesota Drive and 36th Avenue, Spenard Road couplet study. It's just a study, but it's an interesting new idea. So chapter 8 is also the implementation chapter as far as action items. There are a lot of action items there. I encourage you to review that chapter. And if there are any things that seem interesting or maybe not doable, we'd appreciate if you'd let us know that.
Can I ask a specific question?
Yes, sir.
On page 8 of chapter 7, 103 is Academy of Vanguard Drive.
Yes.
$16 million. Is that, who pays that $16 million?
The plan doesn't, we don't identify exactly where the money's coming from.
Through the chair, that $16 million figure was placed in there by PM&E when the PM&E costing of the original design was $16 million.
But there's no fund source, so that could be us, just as much as it could be federal or state funds.
It's a project.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So I would like to tell you one more thing. So we got a final list of projects and we scored them before taking them to the policy committee, the committees. And we did use the land use plan to help us identify special features in the land use plan, transit supportive development corridors. If a project landed on one of those corridors, it got extra points. And we did the same thing with Vision Zero. If a project was on a corridor, didn't matter where, but if a corridor was identified in Vision Zero as a high injury part of the network, then that project got extra points. We also looked at the freight network to help us do that. And so I do feel that we worked very closely with the planning department, long range planning, in that. And they were felt satisfied that we had done our due diligence and that the plan reflected the land use plan. So that's pretty much air quality. Well,
We touched on that in the beginning.
right.
Are there any additional questions? Mr. Rivera and then Ms. Salatel. Mr. Weddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's not a question necessarily about this. I'm just curious about sort of Tuesday, particularly sort of what should our comments look like on Tuesday? And do we have to do this by Tuesday?
Through the chair, I understand your public hearing is on Tuesday, but you actually have, I think, 3 more meetings in which you can take action and decide on your recommendations as a body and the resolution. Is that right?
Yeah, through the chair, the public hearing, you're required by code to have at least one public hearing, so you can have more. There's the timeline that drives this project that Vivian described at the beginning of the meeting. As for the content, I think the intent of the code provision is that your resolution, which is essentially a blank, fill in the blank document right now, is the gathering instrument for all of your feedback and comments that you want to submit as the Anchorage Assembly to the NTP 2040 review process. I have suggested that somebody, preferably an assembly member or the clerk, become the funnel through which all of those comments get sent, and that they show up in an S version of the document. Alternatively, you could prep 700 individual amendments and do it that way. It's really up to the body, but I think in the past the most efficient way has been to provide a single document.
Okay. Thanks.
Ms. Zalatel, Mr. Welton, and Ms. Kennedy.
Yes, how do you, or where does one find the specific scoring for the projects you mentioned if they want to look at how the scoring was applied to them? Is that on a website or public information?
We had a list with scores on it. We did, right?
Yes.
We did make
Okay, but, and then I just use the current scoring that's available on the website to look at it, to compare it?
Yeah, on the project website, we have the scoring criteria.
Okay, so then I just go and overlay that over to see if I agree or disagree with how they came out?
You're welcome to do that if you want to.
Yeah, I do want to do that, that's why I'm asking. Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes. Excuse me. Yeah, thinking about Tuesday. So public hearing, we do have more time. And I don't know who would be on the committee. I mean, it seems like natural Pete and Meg and I could be the funnels for the thing, because it would be odd to come in with a whole bunch of different amendments on it. And in some regards, we're not going to turn this whole thing on its head and say, I don't believe that initial goal is correct. It should be something totally different, because that was a 2-year-old input, and we're further down. But it does inform the update in 4 years, and we're working on the tip even sooner. So it's not really bad to have, I think, some broad philosophical comments about the direction. But I don't think to anticipate we're going to change this dramatically. It is a long-range plan. It's a shorter one, so we'll have to bring that. But practically, so I sent in a list of questions here, which we won't get to today. But what would you do with this? Do you guys have time to kind of comment on these and say, okay? I mean, some of them are just edits. You say, yeah, we'll do that. But it'd be kind of funny to have some of these in an assembly resolution. I think some are broader philosophical. It should go in there.
It's really up to you. We will develop a comment response summary when we take all of our comments, and the assembly comments will be part of that. So we'll provide that to the AMAS committees. But I'm afraid that's probably going to be too late for your purposes. If you wanted to see our comments when you are, or did I misunderstand?
Well, no, I think it is the questions I sent in, is that something you could get on before we would deliberate, which my guess is will not be Tuesday. My guess is Tuesday we'll have the public hearing, and we'll take some time to think about it and deal with it at the next meeting. So in regards to these, if you had a quick, you guys do sometimes very detailed comment response. Do you want to just put these into that list with all the other comments? You'd rather do that?
I think that would be the fair thing to do.
So what we would need to know is the comments that you've sent to us already, is that from you as an assembly member or is you as a policy committee member?
This is me as assembly.
Okay, then I would recommend to go in with the rest of the assembly comments, so we have a clear distinction, because everything you've sent so far, we've assumed is you as a policy committee member. So I'll need to work with you on which is which, because it still has to go through the assembly's approval process if it's a comment that's going to go forward or not.
Well, some things I sent you those two. I mean, some are just simple typos.
Those we could just add in. Yeah, those are edits.
Okay, through the chair, to expand on that, I think those comments, John, about extractable or other are perfectly acceptable. But when you begin to veer into sort of policy recommendations, because we serve on the policy committee, it's tenuous. So we would recommend that those go through the full assembly document and then come to the policy committee. Because ultimately, you as a policy committee member and Ms. Zalatel will see your own comments and be, reviewing and rating those.
Yeah, and my only thing is, if they comment out and I go, oh, John, that's a dumb idea, and I go, oh, okay, maybe I'll skip. It's not like I assume that all my ideas are quite right. Sometimes Dean is very good at saying, well, that won't work because, and I go,
Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Quinn-Davidson, then we need to end.
Thank you. My question is in regard to some specific projects for the Eagle River. I think it's number 112, 114, and probably 111. Yeah. So these are all the Glen Highway interchange, and it looks a little bit to me like, is there the priority? I mean, are these actually meant to be prioritized in this number? Because with the numbering, okay.
The 100s are short term, and the 200s are long term.
But they're still prioritized.
But within the short term, they're not prioritized.
Okay,
In fact, they're
okay.
alphabetized.
Okay, well, my only question was, it looks like there are some interchange planning and environmental linkage studies that are happening after the interchange reconstruction. So I'm just hoping that the studies and kind of the nuancing of what needs to happen happens before we start any kind of construction.
I'm sure that was the intent. I mean, if
Okay.
you're going to have a study in the same term, that you would want to do the study first.
Okay, and then, so part of that conversation then, I know a very specific question is the concept of the interchange of the Highland Road ramp, is that still the idea of having the flyover basically from like the Highland Road, Yosemite Drive interchange across the highway to dump them onto somewhere close to the way station? Is that?
This comes up often enough that
Okay.
I think that they would have to look at it. But
Okay.
it probably, it may be an outdated concept.
It's about a 20-year-old concept.
Yes, it is. So no promises, but I mean,
Okay.
I think that anybody would want to look at the history of what's been looked at already there.
Okay.
And then come to maybe a different conclusion.
Because one of them talks about a 2-lane exit or exit ramp or entrance ramp, whatever. So anyway, so I'm just trying to figure out if that's still the thought. So then another specific question, if there is something on here that is not quite on your radar screen, I'm thinking specifically, DOT has given a right-of-way on Eagle River Loop Road for secondary access out from the area where the Eagle River High School is. How do we get something like that on the radar screen? Not necessarily that needs to be a project, but so that there's an awareness of what DOT has already given, yet not quite in a place where it can be built yet. How do we document that?
It's
in this-
interesting. Are you talking about to Eagle River Loop Road?
To the Loop Road.
I know what you're talking about. So that that idea actually got shot down when we were looking at ideas and to come up with our list. And I can't. I think DOT thought it was really not appropriate to put access to the freeway at that point.
Well, my understanding is that they've actually already given the right of way.
Well, that is very interesting. So obviously,
okay.
I don't have the latest information.
Okay, well, then maybe
so
we
that's
need to do some
that's a
research.
change. I would just say we're so far along in this process for this one. We happen to be starting the next one like right now. We want to obligate the funds. We need to get started right away. So hang on to that.
Okay, we'll work on it another way.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
I was going to ask for Ms. Gleason to share a couple comments, but I think we might have run out of time, so I'll leave that to your discretion. I don't think she can be at the meeting on Tuesday.
I can do that.
You can?
Okay, great. Yeah, Ms. Gleason, if you don't mind coming to the public hearing on Tuesday, that'd be wonderful. I think the plan will be to open public hearing and hear from the public, and then we will delay this till at least the 25th. What is March 10th is when you have to have them by?
Yes.
9. So we do have one other, okay, so we do have one,
Well, the 45
no, March
days
11th is
done
our
by
one
then.
now. So we'll have to have it done by the 25th. And I think the plan will be to filter comments as Mr. Weddleton, well, no, it has to go through the clerk's office, right? So we don't violate the Open Meetings Act. And so we'll find a point of contact at the Open Meetings Act to filter assembly comments, and we will perhaps task the 3 of you with drafting the resolution, and then we'll vote on it on the 25th. Ms. Alto?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've asked council to give me some feedback. I have the conflict with Midtown congestion relief, so I don't want any comments with regard to that. So I've asked them for some direction in terms, because this does deal with midtown congestion relief to some extent.
Well, absolutely, but why do you have a comment? I mean, why do you have a conflict? You're a legislator, you can make
That particular project, I have a personal conflict with,
right, okay.
so I've
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
for some guidance on how we need to navigate this. I will let the chair know when the time I get that opinion, but I just wanted to raise that. So
Okay.
please don't send any comments my way.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I'm not sure who you asked for an opinion on that, but, you know, if one line in a 10,000 line document is something you have a conflict on, I think it merits you having a voice in that conversation, so.
Sure. Well, Dee?
Okay, she wrote it to me as an ethics officer this morning, and I think the answer will be, is that please avoid any discussion or input on that one aspect of the plan, the midtown congestion, right? The rest of it, you're up and down, fine, no problem.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that'll be our plan, and we need to close this work session and on to the next one. Thank you for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.